At about 10,000 feet, I'm tracking the pipper right up to the target. I hit the pickle button. I get 2,000 pounds off the left wing, 2,000 pounds off the right wing. I start pulling back on the stick and pull about 8 G's pulling out. I check left 7 o'clock. John Marshall's about 6,000 feet at left 7. His bombs are coming off. And all of a sudden, my radar warning receiver starts screaming at me. Beep, 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 beep. I look up, and I've got an SA-2 at left 8 o'clock. I see the launch. I look out the window, and here comes a telephone pole riding a smoke trail through the air coming at me.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we have an amazing combat story from a 28-year F-16 fighter pilot, Jet Jernigan. Jet's story is remarkable, from how he stumbled into aviation to eventually lead the first 20 F-16s into Kuwait in the Gulf War to take out 10 surface-to-air missile sites and clear the way for Air Force bombers. Jet and his 19 wingmen evaded over 40 SAM launches that day in just a 9-minute period in what can only be described as organized chaos. He would go head-to-head with SA-2s, SA-6s, and SA-9s in just a span of a few months. As a member of the South Carolina Air National Guard for his career, it seems unlikely that Jet's unit was chosen ahead of other active duty Air Force squadrons to be the first F-16s into Kuwait. Fortunately for Jet and his team, they had just won Gunsmoke, the Air Force's preeminent international aviation air-to-ground combat training exercise, despite flying older F-16s against the active duty Air Force's modernized variants, proving they were equally capable aviators. Jet had many firsts in his career, including being the first Air National Guard pilot to attend the Air Force's elite fighter weapons school, where, with his high school degree and Air National Guard pedigree, finished as the honor graduate or Top Gun. Jet is an incredibly humble, accomplished, and God-fearing veteran who continues to live out a Hollywood-like story flying to this day. Stay tuned to the end of this episode to hear Colin Powell's very own description of when Jet was interviewed by a reporter just after landing from his first mission in the Gulf War. It says it all. And now, please enjoy this wide-ranging discussion with none other than Jet Jernigan. Jet, thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us today. I'm so excited to dig in.
I appreciate it, and honored to be here.
So I know you've had a storied career in the air. I mean, you still fly, and just going back so many decades, but I am curious to hear how you stumbled into aviation. So I'm trying to figure out, as you grew up, did you always know that you want to be a pilot? Did you always want to fly? Did you have that spark early on?
No, Ryan, 90% of the guys I flew with did. They knew as children, but I was not one of them. My father was a Marine Corps sniper in World War II. And coming out of that, he decided he didn't want to be in the mud anymore. And so he went to pilot training. Well, the timing was in the early 50s. He was the first pilot in South Carolina to fly the P-80 jet aircraft. So his name was Bob Jernigan. His buddies teased him and said, "Oh, it's Jet Jernigan, the big jet pilot." Well, that name stuck, and it was his call sign. Shortly after he retired, I began flying, and they tagged me with Baby Jet. But if you think back to the 50s, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it was the birth of the jet age, and there were a tremendous number of accidents. My dad lost a lot of friends in accidents, and he never pushed me to fly, never encouraged me to fly. I never even thought about it. But I did grow up around him flying, and in 1960, he flew the F-104. They did the high altitude test for the U.S. Air Force out here in South Carolina at McEntire Air Base, and my dad was the 609th person in the world to go Mach 2, and they were doing high altitude tests. And I mean, we're just out of props now, but my dad was a traveling Similac milk salesman, and he'd go out to the base as a reserve F-104 pilot. They put him in spacesuits. He'd go off the coast of South Carolina, 43,000 feet, Mach 1.75, zoomed the airplane into an 80-degree climb, and let it arc as high as it would go. He hit 109,000 feet in 1960 now. The engine would quit. They'd come back down into the atmosphere, get it restarted, and come back and land. These guys were cowboys.
What?
He never pushed me to fly, but I grew up around it. Obviously, it was just amazing, and I thought it was incredible. Well, I went to the University of South Carolina, and my freshman year, my dad said, how about see if you can get some financial aid, because this is costing a lot of money. Well, I wasn't athletic enough to get a Division I scholarship doing anything. I didn't have the grades to get an academic scholarship, but there was ROTC. Vietnam was still going on, and they offered a full ride, 4-year scholarship pilot candidate. And so I signed up for it and became a pilot candidate. That lasted until the end of my sophomore year, where they, after I'd been to all the training, at the beginning of our junior year, they called us in and said, we got some bad news. We don't need pilots anymore. Vietnam's winding down. So I went home to my dad and said, hey, they pulled our scholarships. And my dad said, well, I don't have any money. He said, but, do the best you can. Well, I said, I can't afford to go to college. So I went and got a job running heavy equipment. But my dad said, take all your paperwork out to the guard unit. So I took it out to the guard unit, and they said, don't call us, we'll call you. And I forgot about it. 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. I'm running backhoes, bulldozers, heavy equipment. I'm not even a college graduate. Thursday afternoon, 3 p.m., I'm at the county landfill on a backhoe, and the foreman comes and gets me and says, you got a phone call in the trailer. He drove me down. I picked up the phone, and it was a guy named Sergeant Doug Lovett. And he said, do you still want to go to pilot training? And I said, pilot training? I hadn't thought about that in like 3 years. And he said, we had a kid that we had selected. He's supposed to leave Sunday for officer candidate school, and he just got admitted to the hospital with viral pneumonia. If you don't go, we're going to lose the slot. He said, how much college credit do you have? And I said, 62 hours. And he said, well, in the Guard, you only need 60 hours to get commissioned. And so I said, this is how stupid I was, I said, I'll call you back in the morning. So I went home to my parents' house, and I told my dad, I said, hey, this guy called me from McIntyre today and wanted to know that I still want to go to pilot training. My dad said, what'd you tell him? I told him I didn't know. My dad said, you're going. And that was it. And so I went and got my haircut, went swore in. And Sunday I was at officer candidate school, and went through officer candidate school and came out as second lieutenant, graduated first in class, honor graduate, and then headed off to undergraduate pilot training.
Let me hold you for just a sec, Jet, because there are a few things I want to dig into that you just talked about. I mean, one of them is how serendipitous it is that you actually got into flying. Do you think, like, had you not gotten that phone call, would you have just operated heavy machinery for the rest of your life, you think? Would that have been the path you took?
I do think so. I was working for Richland County. It was a government job, a local government job, with a 401k and health insurance and all that stuff. And I had an aptitude for machinery, whether it was heavy equipment or it ended up being jet fighters. And they were talking about maybe paying for me to go back to college and get into the management track. And so that would have been my life. My world would have been very, very small.
Wow.
And it's almost like God reached down and pulled me off of that and sent me to pilot training. I mean, it's just incredible. Now, the young fellow that I took his slot, he ended up getting a slot a few years later, David Hatfield, a great kid. And he came in behind me, and he lost control. The A7 was very kind of unstable if you got in jet wash or you got an adverse yaw or something. And he was doing a low altitude close air support mission up in Gamecock, India, here in South Carolina, and lost control of the airplane, tried to bail out, and was going up the rail as it hit the trees. And he ended up getting killed a few years later. But God bless him and the way that thing worked out. I mean, it changed my life and changed everything to get in the military. You know how stupid we all are young, and I would like to say that, the light bulb came on for me and I understood what had happened. but I still didn't. I went to flights. Graduated first in my class in officer candidate school. I went to flight screening where you do like 8 to 10 rides in a T-41, a Cessna 172, if you've never flown, which I hadn't. And then I went to undergraduate pilot training. When I got to Williams Air Force Base to go through undergraduate pilot training in the T-37, which was a neat little side-by-side twin-engine jet that you do some basic training in before you go to the T-38 Talon, about the fifth ride in the T-37, we were going, it was 6 o'clock in the morning. We were going across the desert down to a local little training base where we could do some touch and go landings. The instructor flying with me was about half asleep. It was quiet, and the light bulb came on. I said, all of a sudden it just hit me what I was doing, and the people that were surrounding me was different than anything I'd ever been associated with in my life. So we debriefed the mission. I went back to my BOQ room after that ride, and I got on my knees and I said, "Dear Lord, please just let me be able to do this and feed my family and be a part of this." And, you know, that was 48 years ago. I'm still in the air. So it was serendipitous is a great description of it. Anyway, I went through undergraduate pilot training, and I was, you know, I had some Belgian guys in my class. They go through a 5-year thing like the Air Force Academy, and they come out, they've already done formation and a bunch of stuff. Most of the guys that were there had 400, 500, 600 hours of flight time before they ever showed up. And I was the only guy in my class. The first day of class, the commander came in and said, "Welcome to Williams Air Force Base," said, "Don't drink and drive." And then he had everybody stand up and say where they went to college, what they majored in, and what aircraft they hoped to get. Well, most of the guys, you know, like snap the attention, Lieutenant John Smith, Air Force Academy, Aeronautical Engineering, and I hope to get a F4. Well, I'm in the back of the room. It got around to me, and I stood up and said, "My name is Bobby Jernigan. I hadn't graduated from college yet. I got a guaranteed A7." Sat back down. Those guys looked around. They thought there was no justice in the world. I was going to live in my hometown and fly A7s. But we went through the whole course, and when it was done, I finished first in my pilot training class.
That's the other thing that I've noticed, Jet, that people obviously who don't know your story yet, and me just looking at your bio and some of the background I've done, like you finished first in a lot of classes. You go very far. You seem to have an aptitude for flying. And I really want to dig into where this comes from, since you didn't grow up that kind of desiring to fly.
Hey, Ryan, a tremendous amount of it is the same thing that's in you and a lot of these other guys you do with Combat Story. There were so many classes and events I participated in that I wasn't the smartest guy. I wasn't the most athletic guy, but I benchmarked. I was probably the most competitive guy, and I understood perseverance can overcome any shortfall you ever have. And I would benchmark the best guy in the class, and however much he was studying, how much ever he was working out, whatever it was he was doing, I was going to do a little bit more of it. And if I didn't finish first, I would have strived for that and gone further than I would have gone. I could have done much less and passed all these courses. But praise the Lord, I never attended a military course that I didn't graduate first in. Yeah. It was not, I mean, it literally was perseverance more than innate ability. Now, the Lord blessed me for whatever reason. He put me where I needed to be. I had an aptitude for flying.
Where did the competitiveness come from? The perseverance early on, like was it your dad, like the World War II side of him?
My father was extremely competitive. He was extremely competitive. He was not that bad a loser, but he was a terrible winner. When he would win,
what do you mean by that?
And so I don't know. It just it was just innate. The other thing is, I think most of us that have really we got in the military and we adapted to it. Most of us probably came up with doing organized sports, whether it be football,
Yeah.
basketball, baseball, something, where you were part of a team and you had your individual component that you had to be as good as possible, but you also had to blend with the other people to make the whole thing mesh. And it just was always the military was just, it was that next evolution. I was competitive swimming. I was high school, middle school and high school football. I ran track, competitive water skiing. And when aviation came, it was just that next step along that path.
That is so true. It's so common, actually, I would say, for so many vets. Now, you mentioned you come right out of school and training after Vietnam. Is there any bit of you at the time that's frustrated that you weren't in that war? Or was it just...
Well, when I got in ROTC, it was to go to Vietnam and it was to go fly. And it was like they pulled the plug on my scholarship and my ability to even go in the Air Force. And the war was over. And so it looked like we were going to enter a very difficult period. And a lot of the guys I was in ROTC with that I had made friends with went on and subsequently joined the Air Force, but they became, personnel officers and other things, and they never made it to pilot training. And just incredibly, I ended up not only going to pilot training, but getting a jet fighter living in my hometown. So it just really was incredible the way things worked out. Now, the incredible blessing for me was the timing. I mean, at the time it was frustrating, but at the same time, many of the guys I flew with were combat vets. They came out of Vietnam, 1, 2, and 3 tours on some of them. And so I learned at their feet about what combat was like. It was not a prolonged period of peace where guys didn't have combat experience. And so these were just incredible guys. Waldo de Flaming that flew F-105s and A-7s in Vietnam. Dale Dorn flew F-100s. Georgia Namnett, Johnny Johnson, just incredible guys that I sat at their feet and learned as a young lieutenant. And they really tailored my thoughts about the way you employed and the way you work as a team and the way the squadron ought to operate.
I'm sure your dad saw some serious combat, the way you described being a sniper in World War II.
He did.
How did he feel about you becoming a pilot and going down that road, especially after Vietnam, which obviously didn't have the greatest homecoming or welcome for our troops?
While he would have never pushed me to do it, he was extremely proud that I ended up going to pilot training. And in particular, my success when I graduated, all these things, and did very, very well at. He loved me. He was proud of me. But all of a sudden, when I became a fighter pilot, I was in the club. I was part of the equation now. Now, there was one thing about it. When we converted to the F-16, now the A-7 was unbelievable. We'll talk about that in a second. An amazing airplane. I'm very grateful that was my first jet, the A-7D. And then in 1983, we converted to the F-16. Well, we had been fighting F-4s out of Beaufort, the Marine Corps, out off the coast of South Carolina, dogfighting with the A-7, and they were always kicking our butts, and all of a sudden, we get the F-16, we go down there, and we are handing them their hats, buddy. So I would go over to my dad's house, and I go, "Oh, Daddy, you wouldn't believe how what I did to this F-4 today," and he'd listen to me for a little while, kind of nod, and then he'd say, "Well, let me ask you something, son. Have you been Mach 2 yet?" And I go, "Well, Dad, the F-16 AMO really only does about 1.6. You go, "Oh, okay. You been over 100,000 feet yet?" I go, "Well, no, the 7." He go, "Well, come back and talk to me when you have." That he did that in 1960 now. And many years later, when we got the Block 52 F-16 with a Pratt & Whitney 229, in 1993, I was doing one of the first functional test flights on it off the coast of South Carolina. And during the test, I'm at 40,000 feet, and you're doing a Mach run, and then you pull the power back, make sure everything works. Well, I pushed the power up, and this thing went right to 1.85. And I said, oh my goodness, that was faster than I'd ever been. And it was still accelerating. I said, well, let's see. And I let it run, and it went right up to about 1.95, 956, 97, 2.0, 01, 02. And I mean, I pulled the power back. I was at 40,000 feet, indicating about 710 knots, and the canopy will implode at 800. So I pulled the power back and everywhere. So about 25 years after my dad did it, I finally went Mach 2, and he passed away in 85, but he was looking down somewhere going, all right, that's one. You know,
that's great.
I don't know I'll ever see the 100,000 feet.
Talk about the competition, though, that you mentioned in him the first time you come back. Come talk to me.
But he was extremely proud of me, and I ended up eventually getting selected to go to fighter weapons school, and I was in weapons school, and he died very unexpectedly at age 57, massive heart attack. You know, those World War II era, Depression era guys, you know, they worked and worked and worked, and just ran themselves into the ground. And, you know, we didn't know anything about, you know, fat and smoking and drinking and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, just he didn't look any different than me and you, but his heart just gave out.
You know, and we'll talk about fighter weapons school. I'm sad to hear you didn't get to talk to him about your experience in Desert Storm. That's one of the things I was just curious.
Me too. I really am, you know, but I'm glad he got to see me fly the F-16, and we shared so much in common. In the meantime, I'm going to back up just a little bit. I ended up going through undergraduate pilot training, and then you go to fighter lead-in and survival school, and, you know, you go through all the stuff there, and, you know, once again, the instructors in survival school at the time with the POW training and stuff are guys that had actually experienced it. So that it was pretty demanding, you know, and anyway, I just have tremendous respect, and it was incredible. And I learned at the feet of giants. So, but then I went to A7 school and the A7D.
Yeah. Let's talk about the A7. Give us the rundown on this aircraft.
The A7D was the A7 was a Navy airplane, and they became the Air Force came up with the Air Force variant. They put advanced avionics in it. Now, this is 1960s and early 70s technology, and in this aircraft was the first real accurate heads-up display system, computerized bombing indicators, inertial navigation system, projected map display, a moving map that was, you know, so as you're moving, I mean, it's all this advanced stuff, and it was just an amazing airplane, and it was heavy, and it would carry a ton of bombs and missiles and rockets, and it's very, very stable on final. You know, obviously no smart bombs at the time, but it was the best day visual bomber in the world. I mean, just a great airplane. The avionics suite with the INS, the heads-up display, computerized bombing became the foundation for the F-18, F-15, F-16. So after flying that airplane for 6 years and getting 1,100 hours and deploying to Europe and a bunch of different places in it, we converted to the F-16. Our conversion to the F-16 avionics-wise and learning the new airplane was just almost nothing. I mean, it was really easy. Now, we had to learn to fight air-to-air because the A-7 wasn't an air-to-air airplane, but the air-to-ground mission and the close air support work was almost identical. And so the A-7 was really a great airplane for a young lieutenant to come and be ready for that next generation airplane. Came home as a brand new combat-ready lieutenant and was told to shut up and fly wing and stay in position and watch these guys. And that's what I did. I just I tried to emulate them and got better and better at my bombing, and got more and more competitive with them as I went along. And finally, on February the 9th, 1982, Senator Strom Thurmond made the public announcement that the South Carolina Air National Guard would become the first Guard unit, first reserve unit in America to fly the F-16. That day, I walked into my commander's office and said, I want to go to fighter weapons school in the F-16. And he said, okay,
wow.
You can.
How great. And again, you were in the Guard this whole time, right? So did you have a day job? You mentioned your old man was a salesman. What were you doing outside of flying?
I was a Guard bomb But if you think back, Ryan, and you're too young probably to even remember this, but coming out of Vietnam, there was a big anti-military movement in the United States, and Jimmy Carter got elected. The military budgets got cut tremendous amount. So as we were flying the A7, there was not a whole lot of paydays and money. Well, I wasn't a full-time guy. I was a lieutenant, and I was a part-timer. There's only like 8 full-time pilots in each guard unit. And there was, I could get 8 or 10 days pay a month, but that wasn't enough. And I had a buddy that was working offshore oil rigs out in the Gulf of Louisiana for Zapata Drilling Company. And he said, you ought to come to work with us. He said, it's 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So I said, yeah, I can do that. And then I come home, fly jets for 2 weeks, and I go back and work on the oil rig for 2 weeks. So I applied and got the job. So every 2 weeks, we would drive to Lafayette, Louisiana, get on a surplus Vietnam Huey leaking oil all over the place, fly about 125 miles out in the Gulf and go on this oil rig. And I do 12 on, 12 off, slinging tongs and stuff on the oil rig. The guys working there couldn't believe I was a jet pilot, out there doing that. And then I'd go home and fly A7s for 2 weeks. Well, there was I saw one guy get crushed by a load of pipe. Saw another guy get a hand cut off when the tongs caught him and it cinched tight. And I almost lost these 2 fingers when a 55-gallon drum full of oil fell on it. I thought, flying's too important. So I gave that up. But finally, 1982, Ronald Reagan showed up and things changed and there became paydays and opportunity for us to do some training. And I kept improving my stock and competing for full-time positions, and eventually got a full-time flying training instructor job.
Man, so you got to live where you wanted and fly an awesome jet.
Hometown, flying A7s and F-16s.
It
was the greatest job in the world. Now, I'm still just a high school graduate. I hadn't even graduated from college yet. So this was like, I thought, well, I'm learning everything I need to know. I don't need to go back to college and learn some business stuff. I'm studying enemy jamming systems and MiG-23s and their radars and ATOL missiles. And, I'm studying SA-2s and SA-6s and, the important stuff. And eventually it caught up with me, and I was actually had just been promoted to major, and they called me in and said, would you like to be a lieutenant colonel? And I said, oh yeah, that'd be nice. And they said, well, you're going to need a 4-year degree. I said, oh my gosh, now I'm 30, I got a family, I'm an instructor pilot, full-time guy, and I had to go back to night school and finish up my 4-year degree, which was the only really cool part about that is I ended up getting my 4-year degree from Liberty University, distance learning through Shaw Air Force Base, which is right near us, and ended up getting my 4-year degree. It was awarded, and I actually ended up getting the diploma, big old diploma, shipped to me in March of 1991 in the desert in Saudi Arabia. I got called to the commander's tent, had a little ceremony, and gave me my college degree there.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. All right. So what's your initial experience with F-16s then? Like, how do you feel about the transition and sitting in this new aircraft?
It was let me tell you about the F-16, particularly the F-16A model. Ryan, if we go back to the Wright brothers, airplanes have evolved in power, in turn capability, in carrying capability, in speed. They became more and more capable. And then you came up with these incredible the F-4U and the P-51 World War II airplanes, just amazing. And then here came eventually the jets and the F-4 and all the amazing stuff it did. And eventually this unbelievably magic fly-by-wire, instantaneous 9G capable aircraft, greater than 1-to-1 thrust to weight ratio. It will accelerate going straight up and fly to the limits of human capability. Now, it had some avionics in it, but I'm still I'm going into enemy territory, and I'm looking with my eyeballs to find targets, and I'm dropping dumb gravity bombs. I'm flying the most incredible machine that goes to the very limits of my capability, and yet I'm still the most important component in the machine. I'm flying that airplane like they flew P-51s in World War II. We went to Desert Storm. We'd be assigned a kill box that was 30 by 30 kilometers, and we go in and fly around looking for targets. And we found them. We're dropping dumb bombs on them. That's the way we operated. In 1993, we converted from the F-16A model to the Block 52 F-16C model doing the suppression of enemy air defenses mission. The F-16C Block 52 has harm targeting system that gathers all the electronic data in the airspace. And as you're flying along, you're cutting angles on everything that's hitting the airplane, and you can pinpoint that location. Not only that, with data link, all the airplanes are talking to each other. And so I am getting even a more refined picture, but it's beyond that. My aircraft in that data link system is talking to JSTARS, AWACS, Navy airplanes, Army tanks. As I approach the battle space with the new airplane, the data all fills itself in, shows me what's going on. And of course, I've got smart weapons hanging on the wings. The airplane talks to the weapon. I give my consent, and we can go kill stuff. Now, I am extremely grateful I flew the A7. The F-16A model was the Ferrari, the sports car for everybody. In 1993, when I flew the Block 52, I knew two things. I was about 5 times more lethal than I had ever been. I was also about half as important as I had ever been. The machine, the technology is just incredible. It's unbelievable. Now, the amount of data coming in, it was a whole new set of challenges. It was more stick and rudder and seat of the pants in the A model F-16. In the Block 52, it is data management and trying to process at the right time. You've got so much stuff coming in, it's easy to get tunnel vision. And as you know, that'll kill you in combat. You've got to be looking at the right stuff at the right time. You've got to be able to process large amounts of information. In particular, when you're working as a team, I have to know that my number 8 guy back here is 400 pounds less fuel than the rest of us. You know, I have to keep up with all those things, even though I've got all this data available to me. So, you know, the F-16 itself, the A7, you sat in the cockpit. You were in the cockpit, and you've got this glare shield up in front of you and bulletproof glass and all that kind of stuff, even though I had that bulletproof glass destroyed by a bird one time, came in and hit me. But the F-16, you sit on the end of the cockpit, and you've got a bubble canopy with no canopy rail. There's nothing. It's just glass, and the canopy rail's down by your legs. You can't see your wings in the peripheral vision. It's like your body's going through space. It's almost scary the first time you fly it. You're kind of stuck out there, but at the same time, you've got this incredible view of the world. Now, it took a flight or two to get adapted to it, but the seat reclines at a 30-degree angle. You've got the throttle in the left, and the stick is over on the right. It's almost like you're sitting in your lazy boy. And it's extremely comfortable, and it is a fighter pilot's airplane.
Wow. Can we back up to the bird strike, please? Can you describe that?
I am a senior first lieutenant. I've got 2 Vietnam vets as 1 and 2. Johnny Johnson, great, just a bad A guy. I mean, he was 2 tours in Vietnam. He raced motocross. He was played like adult soccer leagues. He was a big manager for a local company, a personnel manager, competitive as he could be. Well, Johnny and I were betting the front 2 guys because we're going to the bombing range after we do this low level. So we're flying. Johnny's off my left about 6,000 feet. The other 2 guys are up in front of us about 2 miles. We're doing a box formation, about 300 AGL going down a river at about 450 knots, about 500 and something miles an hour. So the A7, the stick was in the middle, the throttle was on the left. The engineers put the computer on the right side of the cockpit. So I had to swap hands, check Johnny, look at 12 o'clock, make sure I'm not fixing to hit the ground because you're moving pretty fast and 300 feet isn't very high. I look clear, I look down, and I look up, and from about me to you is a cattle egret. It's one of the big white birds with long legs. And he's like, well, I'm doing almost 900 feet per second. So when I see that and my brain registers it, I mean, he's microseconds from coming in the cockpit. I just happened to look up and see him. Thank God, because my brain is sending the signal to my hand to pull back. Well, the canopy on the A7, it crushed the left side of it, and the bird came in and hit me. And it was like a bomb went off. It's not like crack and, there's wind. Stick your head out the window of a car going 100 miles an hour. I'm doing over 450 miles an hour. And it was like somebody hit me with a sledgehammer in the chest as hard as they could. The impact was just incredible. And now the air's whipping around. But I had taken my hand and started moving the stick aft, and it saved my life. I mean, it pulled me up. Well, the airplane's now slowing down. I ducked down behind the glare shield and started trying to look around. I couldn't see anything. I thought, oh, my God, I'm blind. Well, I put my hand up. There were bird guts all over my visor. I raised my visor. I checked, pushed power up and back and checked the engine instruments. That looks good. And I looked down and blood was everywhere. And I just knew I was squirting out of my neck or something. Well, after starting feeling around, I think, well, I don't think that's me. It might be the bird. Well, now I'm hurt, but, I'm still operational. Now, everything I just told you is about 15 seconds, 10, 15 seconds. The guys hadn't even noticed I pull up out of formation yet. Well, I'm the new lieutenant, and I don't want them to think I'm a wimp. So I know I'm not going to say it right. Before I ever even keyed the mic, I practiced. I'm down behind the glare shield, wind's coming through. I got blood everywhere, but I still went. I was trying to tell Johnny I need to go back and land. And I said, Johnny, I hit a bird. I finally keyed the mic and said, Johnny, this is Jet. I hit a bird, and he came in the cockpit with me here. I think I'm going to go back and land. They thought, that's a cool lieutenant, buddy. So anyway, went back and landed and, was kind of bruised up for a little while, but managed to survive that one.
Oh, yeah. Like, were you bruised the next day?
Oh, yeah.
Jet?
I mean, here to about the bottom of my chest, but the destruction of the bird coming through, a 2-pound mallard at 400 knots generates 2 million foot-pounds of energy. And that's why you take something like Sully did up in New York, where it hit all those geese and stuff, that airplane didn't stand a chance,
All right. When do you drop the baby jet call sign?
They finally dropped that. The older guys that flew with my dad retired in 71, and I got selected to go to officer camp school in 75. And so there were still a number of guys. Johnny Johnson, the guy I just told you about, my dad was his flight commander, and he was my first flight commander.
Wow.
So once all those guys were gone that flew with my dad, the other guys started calling me Jet and dropped the baby part.
That's cool. And did you ever get to fly with your old man, Jet?
No, never did. Never.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now if the timing is right, can we jump to fighter weapons school? Let's talk to people about what it is and how on earth they let a guard guy in there. That's step one for me.
Pointing that part out, fighter weapons school is the top gun school that the Navy, Tom Cruise made famous for us all, but the air, we kind of pick at the Navy guys, the Navy Top Gun guys. It's an amazing course. God bless them. I appreciate it. I think it's lasts like 6 weeks. Ours is like 6 months because the F-16 is multi-role. We do everything from nuclear weapons delivery, air superiority, close air support, night interdiction. We do everything in fighter weapons school. It is the pinnacle in any weapon system to get to go to that school. What the U.S. Air Force hopes for is to have at least one fighter weapons school graduate in each squadron. And so it's a very intense course, and you become the liaison for not only the tactics and teaching all the tactics to the squadron and taking the advanced stuff to them, but you have to know all the maintenance stuff and all the things about how the avionics work, so you can become the liaison with maintenance and avionics and the weapons guys for the bomb dump. And, you just become the area expert. And I really, really, really wanted to go. So, like I said, I went to my commander, Dale Dorn, and said, I want to go to fighter weapons school in the F-16. We hadn't even converted yet. And so the following year, in 1983, we got the F-16. And we went to a conversion course down at MacDill Air Force Base. And just, I've already told you about flying the airplane, and it just was amazing and really cool. And went through the conversion course, and then me and two other guys stayed for the instructor course, because we were going to come home and be the instructors for the unit as we were converting. And of course, once again, guard guy shows up and takes all the orders and stuff. But going through the thing, we ended up getting it. And as soon as I graduated from instructor course, we applied for me to go to fighter weapons school. Well, the U.S. Air Force and the Guard at the time, this is in the early 80s, and of course the total force and all that kind of stuff, everybody was still competing for dollars and missions and everything. We're in the middle of the Reagan Revolution, and there was a lot of money and stuff, but there were 39 fighter wings of airplanes in the United States Air Force. And so there was a lot of pressure to graduate Air Force guys to send into these fighter squadrons all over the world. Each wing's 3 squadrons, so multiply 39 times 3. They need a lot of guys, and they're only graduating 36 a year. Well, they told the Guard, they said, ain't no way. We can't afford to give you a slot. Well, the Guard at the 3-star level got their nose out of joint and said, whoa, are we total force or not? You want us to be ready to go. You're going to take our guy. And the Air Force said, no, we're not. Well, they fought it out for 2 years. And finally, in the end of 1984, they said, okay, we will take one reserve guy a year. And so we were the only unit with the F-16 at the time. So in January of 1985, I got my GMC 4-wheel drive pickup truck and left South Carolina and drove to Nellis Air Force Base to go to Top Gun School, go to fighter weapons school, and showed up there. And I was one of 12 guys in the class, and it turned out to just be a class of all-stars. There were amazing guys in it. And, I'm still just a high school graduate, but I've got less F-16 time than any of the other guys there, of course. But a few of the guys that were there was a guy named a guy named Roger Riggs. As soon as we graduated, he was selected as Thunderbird lead. A guy named Lieutenant General Burt Field, who was a good friend of mine. After we got there, we got to be real good buddies, and he ended up being a 3-star commander over in PACAF. And Mike Hostage ended up being the commander of Air Combat Command, 4-star general and stuff. And so anyway, it was an incredible time to be at the fighter weapons school. Money was coming in. We had unbelievable resources. The F-15 guys actually got SR-71s as their targets to go
No way.
Yeah. I led a mission towards the end of the course. It was a area defense mission where I had 8 F-16s and 4 F-15s to defend against a 32-ship strike package. They generated out of all those airplanes, out of the 12 guys on our side, there were only 6 students. They generated 12 airplanes on our side, 32 airplanes on the other side, tankers, AWACS, and everything for the 6 of us. They were spending a ton of money on our training. It's unbelievable the stuff we got to do in fighter weapons school. And in March of 1985, my mom called and said my dad had died. And it was just completely unexpected. He was very proud that I got to go to fighter weapons school. And my mom my dad took care of everything. And so I went home for the funeral, and I was going to stay. I was going to withdraw from fighter weapons school. And my uncle, my dad's brother, stepped in, and my mom, they said, you got to go back for your dad. And so I buckled my chin strap, went back, caught up on some stuff I'd missed, and ended up finishing the rest of the program and won the Top Gun Award as the top pilot in the class.
How hard was it to focus when you came back, having
It was
lost your old man?
difficult. It just it was so unexpected. Now, shortly after I got back to McIntyre, one of the commanders there, a great fighter pilot, George Jernigan, his dad was in his mid-80s and had been a prolonged illness, and he died. Well, George was just as upset about losing his dad as I was mine, so it really doesn't matter when we lose our parents, it just is it's a traumatic thing, but we owe it to them to carry on. And my mom flew out for my graduation from fighter weapons school to represent my dad, and it was a special time.
Oh, wow. Now, what would you say was, or would you agree that that was the toughest flying that you ever did, was at that course, or was Desert Storm harder than that?
Desert Storm was harder than that due to the emotion and the actual risk that all of us, my fellow aviators, were incurring, and the responsibility you bore for mission success and trying to keep everybody alive. But I had been an instructor pilot. I went through the official school to be an instructor pilot in the A-7D. I had 1,100 hours in that. I had about 350 hours in the F-16. I had been a fighter pilot for a number of years, when a good 10 or 12 years, when I went to fighter weapons school. I went to fighter weapons school, and 6 months later, I was twice as good as I had ever been. It was unbelievable. I was stunned at how much more I had to go to get there. But when I graduated fighter weapons school, I was as good as I'd ever been. The guys that were there, the intensity of the missions, the science of it, and I mean, there was no slack. You talk about going, I'm always in awe of the guy that goes through SEAL training and BUDS and some of these places, and the things, listening to some of the combat stories you've already recorded. Fighter weapons school is treated like that. And I mean, there is no slack. You fly an hour and 5-minute mission and have a 5-hour debrief. Every single little radio call and every knot of airspeed that you lost that you shouldn't have. I mean, everything is analyzed so much that we came out of it with a whole new understanding of combat aviation.
What do you think you learned about yourself in that course? Like one or two things that made you better beyond just the mechanics of flying?
Beyond the mechanics of flying and the detail of it was that with perseverance and faith that everything will work out, if you just continue to bear up, things will work out. And having lost my dad during the course and having to learn to, for those of us in the military, we have to learn to compartmentalize. At certain times, all the peripheral stuff has to be shelved. You cannot go with this other stuff on your mind. And being able to compartmentalize and isolate and focus properly on family when it's time for that, for grieving when it's time for that, but mission accomplishment when it's time for that. I cannot bring baggage to work when other people's lives are depending on my performance. And that probably had, even though I'd been a combat aviator, that had not been driven home to me until I went to fighter weapons school, and may still not have been without the loss of my dad. But it forced me to deal with focusing, even though I had these other events taking place in my life. And it was a good life lesson. It applies to our day-to-day lives. Whether you're working at IBM or Google or the CIA or jet fighters.
I mean, I'm trying to imagine you've got 12 of the most type A, just the best in this class, and then a guard guy wins it. How much?
A high school graduate guard guy.
How
Well,
much heat did you
the Air
take for
Force, Air
this?
Force want me there to start with, and my dad was a fighter pilot. My uncle was a fighter pilot. The Air Force didn't want me there to start with. I was representing the Air National Guard as a total whole, And so, yeah, I went out there, felt like I was carrying a 600-pound safe on my shoulders, So, yeah, there was a little bit of pressure to perform. So,
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, so let's jump to Gunsmoke, and then we'll transition to Desert Storm. But I feel like I did not know what Gunsmoke was. I had to go look this up. I am sad to say, but can you give us some context for what this exercise is and how important it is in
yes, the
the
U.S.
aviation community?
The United States Air Force back in the 80s came up with William Tell, which was an air-to-air gunnery competition, and they came up with Gunsmoke, which is an air-to-ground low-level and bombing competition. And the intent was to have individual units from around the world, individual wings and squadrons, compete, first of all, to be the selected team from their particular region to go and compete, and to make us all sharper. We compete with each other. We compete with the Navy. We compete with the Marines. Here in South Carolina, we were really blessed. We had Cherry Point right up the road with the Navy, and we had Marine Corps Naval Air Station Beaufort right down the road with F-18s, and we have Seymour Johnson with F-15Es. We have all these people to compete with, and as we compete, we hone our skills to get better and better. The tactics in the United States come from us. That they're not handed down from on high. We develop them in the field. I'll go out and do something. I'll go fight some F-18s, and something works very well. We put that in our bag of tricks and we take it to the next weapons conference. If something doesn't work and we ended up getting our butts kicked, then we go, well, okay, we're not going to use that again. Well, the same thing with Gunsmoke and William Tell. In 1989, the South Carolina Air Guard was selected to go to Gunsmoke 89, and the commander, the Guard Bureau selected us to go, and then the commander came and said he'd like me to be the team leader for that, and so myself and Bullet Bellinger and Tim Demo Rush and Wayne the Hulk Nutt and George Ronan Conan ended up being the 5 pilots, and we had 40 maintenance personnel, but really the whole 1,300 people in the South Carolina Air Guard were behind the effort. Now, we were flying Block 10, the very first F-16s ever built. We're flying the oldest airplanes in inventory. If you think about it, the United States Air Force was converting to F-16 C models, and they had these new Block 25s, Block 30 C models that were being built, and they wanted Congress to buy a bunch more of them. So they put all their efforts behind the Han team and behind the Hill team, and so that their C models would go in. Well, a little Guard unit, reserve unit, we ain't got much money, we ain't got much time. These Air Force units, they started training for this thing a year out. They're traveling all over, going to bombing ranges, doing all kind of, they got unlimited resources. But one of the greatest maintenance guys on the face of the planet, Charlie Savage, a really good friend of mine, he was the chief maintenance guy that was going to go on the team, and I was the chief pilot. We sat down and said, okay, what do we have to do to be the world champions? What's necessary? And they give all kind of other little awards. They give maintenance awards and bomb loading awards and individual pilots awards. We said we're going to shelve all of that and focus on the team award. And so we went down to the lowest level guy, the guy changing the tire, and made him understand that we would have mission failure if it wasn't for him. This is 100% team effort, and anybody in the organization could make any suggestion to streamline the operation. So we started flying and dropping bombs and going to the local ranges and stuff. And finally, we deployed to Nellis Air Force Base for Gunsmoke 89. Now, ESPN was there. All kind of news agencies were there interviewing us. And ABC, NBC coming out and talking to us every day. This is a 2-week competition. There's 18 teams from around the world competing for this thing on the Nellis bombing ranges. I'll tell you one quick story. My best friend, Bullet Bellinger, that flew with me throughout my career, a great pilot, was being interviewed by some young lady for a local news agency. And she came up, put the microphone in his face, and she said, Captain Bellinger, what's it like flying that F-16? And Bullet gave the greatest answer I've ever heard to a media question. He said, well, you remember the first time you had sex? It's like that for an hour and a half at 500 miles an hour. She about back. We never saw that on TV, but that's always stuck with me. And that really is a pretty good explanation. Anyway, so we showed up, and there were 3 major events, regular bombing, tactical bombing, and then a several 100-mile low level that you had to hit these little gates. You have to be plus or minus 5 seconds at every gate that you go through. And then you show up at a target and you drop bombs on a revetted target with flares and stuff coming up at you. And to get maximum score, you have to hit every single gate perfectly. And your bombs have to drop within 3 meters of the target, plus or minus 5 seconds. So everything's got to be really precise, and the most points you can get is 900 points. So we start off on this thing, and we're being fairly competitive. At the end of the first event, first few days, we're in spot number 5, but we're not too far out of first. And so then we go through the tactical portion, and we move up to spot number 3. And so now we're within 3, and I mean, there's a bunch of very talented Air Force supported teams underneath us. And we finally get on the second to the last day on the navigation thing. Me and Bullet are doing it. I'm leading, and we go and fly a mission, and I get a perfect score, 900 points. So I maxed out that particular event the best I could do. Bullet had a real good score. Demo, Tim Rush had a real good score, but Wayne Nutt had like an 840. He had just bombed us off, and his time was off a little bit. We go into the last day in 3rd place. If Wayne Nutt gets an 880 out of 900 points, we close the rest of them out, and they can't win it. Well, we were flying our airplanes, the same airplane you're flying every day. You get to use it just like anything. You kind of get to know it, know exactly how it bombs and how it feels. So we show up at the flight line on the last day. And as we get there, Charlie Savage, the maintenance guy, and Charlie Dixon, another great crew chief, come up to me and they said, Jet, we got some bad news. Wayne Nutt's airplane is broken. The nozzles on the afterburner are not sitting properly, and we can't fix it in time. He's going to have to take the spare aircraft. Well, nobody's flown the spare. We don't even know what the thing will do. So Nutt is nervous as he can be. And he's like, oh, God, now I got to fly an airplane I don't know anything about. All the pressure's on me to try to go win this thing. So I said, okay. I said, we'll do it. I'm trying to calm him down. I send him to his airplane. I go to my airplane to do the pre-flight. And as I do, as I walk by aircraft 305, this beautiful F-16, it looks like ants swarming over the top of it. Maintenance guys all over it, the broken airplane. As I finish my pre-flight, Charlie Dixon comes running up to me with sweat dripping off his chin. And he said, Jet. He said, 305's ready. And I said, look, Charlie, we're not going to, this is a civilian. It's not wartime. We're not going to take any chances. He said, I guarantee you it's 100%. I said, okay. I went and got Wayne Nutt out of the spare airplane, put him in this airplane, calmed him down. He went out and got an 890. And the next day we were declared the world champions. Now, as cool as that was, if you think about it, how many people, I mean, even through everything I'd ever done, I'd never competed for something where the winner is named the world champion. And we were declared world champions, and it's just a bunch of local boys from right here in central South Carolina, reserve guys that went out and beat all these active duty C model guys. The Air Force was horrified that we'd ended up winning the thing. But for 2 years, you get to paint world champions on every single airplane in your squadron. So we had world champions on every tail. Now, if you think back to 1989, the wall in Berlin was coming down, Soviet Union was falling apart, communism was revealing itself as a failed system. My whole career up until that point had been focused on Europe and fighting Russia on a European invasion. Our greatest adversary was gone. I'm living in my hometown flying F-16s, and we're the world champions, and our greatest adversary is gone. So life couldn't be any better, and that did change the following August when Saddam decided to invade Kuwait.
Just a quick thanks to our sponsor, HelloFresh, and we'll get right back to this combat story. We love HelloFresh in our family. We've used it for over 3 years to prepare delicious meals for our family of 5 at least 3 to 4 nights a week. And we were avid users long before they sponsored us. These meals are so easy to prepare, and it feels like you're actually making a real meal that you might get at a restaurant. Some meals can be prepared faster than others in case you've got a night of shuttling kids or family around and don't have much time to cook. In those cases, we'll opt for something fast, but even the regular meals can be prepared easily and in very little time, getting a great tasting and healthy meal on the table every night. We love the different meal options. Some that we really enjoy are the honey butter barbecue pork chops, umami ginger pork bowls, the beef flautas supreme, and more. So go to hellofresh.com/combatstory50, that's combatstory50, and use the code combatstory50 for 50% off plus free shipping. That's hellofresh.com/combatstory50 and use the code combatstory50 for 50% off and get that free shipping. And now, back to Combat Story. Maybe because we haven't really delved into Desert Storm here, could you share a little bit of context for folks? What's the lead up like and what's the feeling? Why is Saddam going there? And then let's talk about your experiences.
Well, if you recall, Iran and Iraq had fought about a 10-year war. I mean, and because of that, both militaries were pretty experienced and very large and had been supplied by the Soviet Union with assets and capability. Iraq had the 4th largest army in the world. In the meantime, that had kind of split up. Saddam, I don't want to get into the politics of it, but Saddam had spoken to representatives from the U.S. government, kind of hinting that he was going to, money-wise, he was going to maybe claim the oil fields in Kuwait. And we gave him the wrong impression that we would not do anything if he chose to do that. So on, I think it was August the 2nd, 1991, he invaded Kuwait. Now, Kuwait...
1990, right? Is it 1990, Jet?
I'm sorry, August of 1990. Yes, yep. I'm sorry. And Kuwait did not have the capability to withstand the onslaught of the Iraqis. Their military was bigger, they had more capability, and they overran them. Well, just south of Kuwait is some key Saudi oil fields, and there was great trepidation that Saddam not only was consolidating his control over Middle Eastern oil by taking Kuwait, that he potentially could go on down into Saudi Arabia. And so the West got very, very concerned about the long-term implications of letting Saddam Hussein be the controlling interest in that part of the world. So we watched that with great interest. And as it went through, there were some initial U.S. Military forces that got stripped out very quickly in August and September. And we knew that if a fight was coming, that they probably were not going to leave the defending world champions at home. So we began to train. Now, you have to think about a guard unit and the sacrifices that a member has to make to be a traditional guard member in the reserve component has to make. And in particular, in the South Carolina Air Guard, we demanded our guys be fully mission ready, combat capable. They had to fly so many missions a month. Now, they may be airline pilots or lawyers or, work somewhere else. But they had to not only have their job, their family time, they had to give us several days a month. And so they had very, very little free time. But we demanded even more of them at that time to spin them up further. And we increased the intensity of our training in the event that we got activated.
Can I just ask, was it really because of Gunsmoke that they sent this guard unit? There have to be you mentioned how many other squadrons there are across the Air Force at the time.
The South Carolina Air Guard, and I will go back to the 70s and 80s. South Carolina is a small state. We're not very big. But at the time, there was a guy named Senator Strom Thurmond that was the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. There was another senator that was very influential in the Democratic Party named Senator Fritz Hollings, who was very powerful and got tons of support for the Charleston port and the U.S. Navy down there, and the Marine Corps station at Beaufort and Parris Island training. We had Myrtle Beach Air Force Base. We're Shaw Air Force Base, McIntyre, the Guard unit. And we also had Congressman Floyd Spence, who was the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. Beyond that, though, Ryan, the unit that I joined was formed in 1946 before the United States Air Force. We're 1 year older than the U.S. Air Force. Barney McIntyre flew P-51s in World War II and came out and went to the Air Force and said, I want to open a guard unit, an Air National Guard unit, a reserve component in South Carolina. And so the Army Air Corps said, yeah, it's a good idea, and gave us a bunch of P-51s. So we were single seat, single engine guys, and Shaw Air Force Base being right across the street. Every time we have an opening for a pilot, we'll have 30 or 40 guys want to come get in. We're able to handpick. So, not to brag too much, but it is a premier unit and always has been. So we were frontline guys. And they activated us on December the 25th, Christmas Day, 1990. The commander, John Marshall, great pilot, had Vietnam tour A-37s, and he selected me to lead the deployment if we ended up going. And so I got with some of the key guys, and we planned the deployment, and they wanted us in Saudi Arabia now in case Saddam started to come south. And so we were to deploy on December the 29th. We had 4 days to get ready. We were going to take off from South Carolina and land in Saudi Arabia, no stop. And so we planned this thing, 11 air-to-air refuelings. The flight time was 14.6 hours to sit in that little cockpit, and you got to get in the thing a little bit early, about 45 minutes or so. It's about a 15-hour sit in the cockpit to get there, a little over 8,000 miles. And finally, on December the 29th, 1990, we showed up out at McIntyre, and it was a dreary, cold, rainy day. Ceilings were about 300 feet, but there were thousands of people out there to see us off. And very, very difficult. If you think back, I mean, I don't know, obviously you're such a young guy, you weren't watching the news and listening to guys like Dan Rather. They were talking about the 10,000 body bags that the U.S. military had ordered for Operation Desert Storm, since we were facing the fourth largest experienced military in the world. And, we didn't know. You don't know what you're going to encounter when you go to combat, like any of us, for that first taste. And beyond that, our families, and to walk out of the fighter squadron carrying my stuff and walk away from family and not know whether you're going to see them again, to go get in the airplane. And then we climb in the jets and taking 24 F-16s, 40 pilots, and 720 support personnel. And we taxi out and light the afterburner, take off, break out at 6,000 feet. The sun's pretty low in the west, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They want us landing in Saudi Arabia in the middle of the day, so we have to take off late in the evening here. Climb up to 26,000 feet, head to Wilmington, North Carolina, and meet up with a KC-10 tanker. And we join up with him and start heading up the East Coast, and we get to Langley in Virginia and turn right, start heading out across the Atlantic. being in the military, you see and do unbelievable things. I'm in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, middle of the night, pitch black dark, with this KC-10 that looks like the Starship Enterprise. The thing is gigantic. We're flying off of him, and he's taking us to Saudi Arabia, but he doesn't have enough fuel for himself and all of us. So they send out of the Azores in the middle of the Atlantic, they sent 4 KC-135 DC Boeing 707s out, and they turn in front of us about 20 miles and roll out about 3 miles in front of us. And this giant DC-10 goes up underneath this Boeing 707, hooks up and starts getting fuel. He sucks all the gas out of the first one, pushes him out of the way, goes to the next one, gets his gas, goes to the third one. Then he asked me to go up and get the gas out of the front guy, so we did that. We topped off completely and finally went all the way across the Atlantic, got to the mouth of the Mediterranean and turned and started heading down. 2 KC-10s came out of Europe and refueled him again. Now we're refueling about every hour. And reason being, I could take that F-16 and maybe with 2-3 refuelings, I could go to Saudi Arabia. But we're keeping it topped off. As soon as I burn off a little fuel, we fill it back up. So at any point I've got a problem, I have to leave. I got the most fuel possible, right? So I can possibly make an emergency base in my little jet fighter. So we keep them topped off the whole way, and that's the reason we did 11 air refuelings. But you have to stay alert. You have to, because you're flying in formation all that time, and it's very physically demanding. Of course, you have to go to the bathroom, and you got to do all that kind of stuff. We're wearing these rubberized, they call them poopy suits, but it's a rubberized dry suit. So if you eject over the ocean, which is in the middle of the winter, that we may have a chance to survive. So very challenging flight. We
mentally, where are you at, Jet? Like, did you have your daughters at the time?
I had one daughter on the way.
Ooh.
One daughter on the way. That was it.
And you're going to your first bit of combat, and you probably heard some stories from your old man from World War II, right?
Yeah, well,
obviously,
all the
Vietnam
guys in my unit, absolutely. And, and if you think about it, Ryan, he invaded Kuwait in August, and it's coming up on January. He's had 5 or 6 months to set the ground, and it was the most heavily defended real estate on earth if we were going to go in there and try to move him out of the way. So anyway, we finally get down to the far end of the Med, cut across Egypt, we go across the pyramids and across the Red Sea and into Saudi Arabia, and we landed at a place called Al-Kharj. It's now a big Saudi air base, but at the time, it was a 13,000-foot piece of concrete with a parallel ramp, and that was it. There was nothing there. There wasn't a building, there wasn't a house, there wasn't nothing. So we landed. Now, U.S. military had been in there. The Air Force had been in there. Our combat comm squadron had been in there setting up communications about 2 months before we ever got there with the fighters. We landed, and what we were in for. They put a ladder up beside the airplane, not even the proper one that hooks on the airplane. You kind of had to work your way to try to get out of the airplane. And we got in the back of a pickup truck with our stuff, and we're still dressed in our full gear. They drove us 2 miles out in the desert, and there were some tents, and there were some boxes of something. And the guy that dropped us off said, those are your tents, and I think your beds are probably in those boxes. If you put them together. Well, we've been up for like 38 hours, 40 hours, whatever. It flew, all the way across the world. So we're in there trying to, it's like the IKEA put the furniture together thing, trying to get rested. But it was an amazing feat to take these aircraft and move them to the other side of the world and to see these massive tankers passing fuel and stuff. Just really incredible what America can do when we put our minds to it.
Wow. Wow.
So we put our little stuff together, and then we had to build our squadron tent. Fortunately, one of the cool parts about being in a reserve unit and a guard unit, most of the people in the organization have other jobs. You have people in your group that are carpenters. You've got people that are lawyers. You got people that are conditioning specialists and stuff. And so we've got skill sets that you may not find in a regular active duty unit. So we've got guys helping us build the fighter squadron and putting it together. And we began flying local missions out of our cars if, in fact, to acclimate to the area, if, in fact, Saddam didn't move. But we still couldn't believe that he wasn't going to move, that he was going to force us to come in and move him. But anyway, that's what ended up happening.
And it's still like timing wise. So you get there end of December, right? So just as kind of the new year is starting out, the air campaign starts, I think, on the 17th of January. Is that right? Like a couple weeks. What are you doing day to day since you've been kind of picked as team lead?
Day to day. Once again, John Marshall, the squadron commander, comes to me and he said, Jet, if we do this, I want you to lead the first mission. He said, go to CENTAF headquarters in Riyadh and see what the plan is. I mean, what do they want us to do? You know, because we still
CENTAF being Central Air Force Command.
Yes. Okay. Central Air Force. Yes, CENTAF was headed the controlling agency for the fight. You know, for the air battle, and they had a headquarters that was in a 5-story down underground in some bunker in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And we're about 50, 60 miles southeast of there on the edge of the Great Saudi Desert. And we're flying some missions out over the Great Saudi Desert to kind of acclimate to featureless terrain and, to get used to flying in the heat and all that stuff. Anyway, so me and 3 other fellows, we get a van and we drive for about 7 or 8 miles across the desert. There were no roads where we were. So we finally got to a paved road and we went to Riyadh and told them who we were and where we were representing. And so we went down to the subfloor and they sent me to the planning element. And so I meet up with some guys, and it turns out that the U.S. Air Force had decided that if we had to go move Saddam, the very first fighters to enter Kuwait was going to be the South Carolina Air National Guard, flying the oldest F-16s in theater and dropping dumb bombs. And they wanted us to go in and knock out 10 surface air missile sites with 20 F-16s. Now, I've said before, this time, there was competition between the Air Force and the Guard for money and missions and everything. And we had wanted to be an equal partner with the U.S. Air Force. Just not quite that equal. A little more equal than we had planned on. So it was shocking that was what they had planned up for us. So we went back to our cars, our base, and began planning with some very talented, competent guys, and we put together a plan we thought would work. But once again, this was some of the most heavily defended real estate on earth. I mean, there were SA-6s and 3s and 2s and AAA, and there was a lot of unknown locations on sites and stuff. And while what they wanted us to do was going to hit these SAM sites, then they were going to come in behind us with Air Force bombers and hit Al Salim Airfield and Al Jabar Airfield, because those 2 airfields, if the Iraqis used them, they could each reach Riyadh quickly on strikes, and they wanted to knock out those airfields. And they were going to use their Air Force bombers to do it after they sent the Guard guys in to clean out the air threat. So we came up. Can I
ask you something, Jet? Just real quick. This might, just for the conspiracy theorists out there, was there any inclination that they may have been sending the Guard in there because they didn't know how dangerous this would be and you had older aircraft?
We never saw it like that, but there was some guys that possibly thought that, okay, if we send the Guard guys and they get tore up, it's old F-16s, we're not going to lose the brand new F-15E models. Lose the F-117s. And here's the thing about stealth. Stealth is a great, wonderful thing. The F-35, the F-22, the F-117 stealth, they're wonderful. But during the daytime, you can look up and see them. And so visual systems can still engage them and kill them. And I mean, stealth is great, but to really protect the airplane, you got to fly it in the dark or try to minimize its visual spectrum. So The F-15E models flew at night. The F-117s flew at night. Most of the F-15s flew at night. So the daytime belonged to the F-16s. We were flying during the daytime. Now, I'll throw in one thing. The bad part is the base we were at, the Air Force decided, because it was a bare base, they built it up, we were operating out of, that was going to become their media center. So they brought in CBS and ABC and NBC and CNN, and all these media people were there. Well, the only show in the daytime was us, the guard guys. And so they're filming F-16s and we're thumbs up and, we're saluting and they're picturing us, because at night, all you see is blinking lights of an airplane going by. And I had friends after the Desert Storm was done said it looked like the South Carolina Air Guard was fighting Desert Storm by themselves. Y'all on the news every day.
I love it.
So anyway, it was a lot of trepidation planning the mission, because I didn't see any way we could do it without losing airplanes. And I'm telling you, Ryan, these guys that I've seen you interview know it is beyond family. It's brothers. You establish a bond and a relationship with the guys that you train with and live with and work with, that your life depends on and their life depends on you. That it's beyond explanation. I mean, you can't even define it. And to know the burden of planning the mission and leading the mission and how mission execution went, it really was. I was honored, but at the same time, it was a tremendous burden. And I prayed a lot during that last few days before it came, and was hoping he would cry uncle and leave, and we wouldn't actually have to go do it. But on January the 16th, about 2:40 in the afternoon, Colonel Marshall came to me and said, the president's given the order for us to take him out. The F-117s are hitting Baghdad and shutting down some communication in the middle of the night. And what that meant was the next morning, as the sun was coming up, we'd be entering Kuwait for our first combat mission.
You send anything home? Do you write anything down that night, Jet?
Well, one of my great losses in the whole thing was a audio diary. I had one of those little teeny microphones. I had one of those little teeny tape recorders with the little teeny cassettes, and I talked to it every day. And I talked about the missions. I talked about what we were doing, what the plan was, how I felt about it. I talked to it before I went to bed at night, relaying. And I had all those little mission tapes, and they're lost. I don't know where they are. I've looked everywhere for them, but, having moved a number of years and stuff, I would have loved to have retained those. But no, you're really getting at the time. We had our final mission brief in the afternoon before the flight. I had the other 19 guys and myself, and of course, Intel and the commanders and everybody, and we gave the final briefing where the threat outlay was as good as Intel could tell and what the plan was. And we were going to meet about 3 a.m. the next morning and get ready and go to the airplanes and head off. The chaplain, Chaplain Bill Evans, who was a local traditional guard guy, but and God bless the chaplains. Chaplain Evans himself made a tremendous sacrifice during Desert Storm. His mother died while we were there. And rather than come home, he stayed with us, providing comfort and encouraging us at every turn. But he prayed for us, and then we all individually went back to our tents, and that was a pretty sleepless night. And it's not just anybody that's gone, and everybody that I have seen you interview, these amazing guys, their very first combat mission. And the next day you're going to be in combat. And in particular, if you had a part in planning and getting it together, is the mission going to work? What have I missed? What have I forgotten? Yeah. How many of my fellow airmen am I going to lose tomorrow? These guys that I love, my brothers. And am I potentially going to lose my life? And then you got to deal with the fact that potentially your action that day is going to result in the loss of human life for the first time, and how you deal with that. And it was a hard, sleepless night until pretty late. And then the Lord gave me a peace and a comfort about it. And I dozed off, and I had about 3 or 4 hours of the most intense, refreshing sleep I've ever had. The next morning, about 2:30 a.m., when I got up, I was focused and refreshed, and I was at a level of performance mentally that I've never been before or since. And I got up that morning and we went and grabbed a bite to eat and went to the squadron tent and got our last intel update. They gave us our escape and evasion charts and our 9mm pistols. I carried 90 rounds of 9mm ammo in my G suit pockets. My legs probably would have broken if I had to eject, but before the war, they showed us a video of the Iraqis interrogating the Iraqis interrogating an Iranian prisoner. It was horrific. I won't even go into the details. It was unbelievable, the terrible stuff. And we're all watching that going, no, I am not peacefully surrendering. I told my guys, I said, if I go down, I am still an offensive weapon system for the United States of America. And I figured if I had 90 rounds, if I was out of ammo, one of two things has happened. Either I'm dead or I have another weapon. So anyway, so we get all our stuff and then we walk out from the squadron and we're walking to our individual airplanes. The crew chiefs, the maintenance guys, the bomb loaders are coming up hugging us. They're not sure how many there are, whether they're going to see us again or not. And very emotional time. And we finally get our airplanes, climb in and get started. Once we started the airplanes and we're in the cycle, we were well trained. During the 80s, God bless Ronald Reagan for what he did for us. He allowed us to train to beat Russia in Europe. We were as good as we had ever been. We were extremely well trained. Saddam picked a very bad time to invade Kuwait. We were really good. So we started, these are the oldest airplanes in theater now. We started 20 F-16s on time. We taxied on time. Went through the end of runway checks on time, and I pulled 20 F-16s onto the runway, each airplane loaded with two 2,000-pound Mark 84 bombs with FMU 913 nose fuses that detonate and create a kill circle of about 3,000 feet. The South Carolina Air Guard has the greatest maintenance personnel in the world. We got good pilots, but our maintenance personnel, my first crew chief, and I didn't get my name on an airplane until I'd been there about 8 years. My first crew chief had been my father's last crew chief.
Oh, wow.
The continuity is incredible. These guys are unbelievable.
Just a quick thanks to our sponsor, Rocket Money, and we'll get right back to this combat story. Like many people, our family tends to have subscriptions for so many different services, or we buy one of these subscriptions and don't realize we're paying a higher rate than we should. Rocket Money has been great for us because it will review our recurring subscriptions and flag some of those that seem higher than the average. So in my case, this happened for several of my subscriptions, including some online music streaming. All I had to do was enter my subscription info for that, and it handled all the price negotiations to get me a lower rate. I didn't have to get involved at all. And now I get the lower rate month over month. It turns out that over 3 million people have used Rocket Money, saving the average person up to $720 a year. So stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/combat story. And now, back to the show.
I flew 50 combat missions in Operation Desert Storm, 2 minor write-ups. And that's the chaff and flare system, the radar warning receiver, the bombs, the radars, the engine, the flight controls. And we beat the crap out of those airplanes. The blowing dust storms, we were overloaded with bombs. We were carrying loads that weren't even in the Dash 34 weapons manual. We pull on the runway, I light the afterburner, head down the runway. It takes 6 minutes and 20 seconds to get everybody in the air because you're required to go 20-second spacing if you've got live bombs on board. I joined the flight. We started heading north towards Kuwait. I called AWACS, the Airborne Warning Controller, and said, can you tell me anything? I told him who we were and I gave him my mission number and said, can you tell me anything about threats in Kuwait? And he said, nobody been in there. He didn't know anything. And I said, well, I hope in about 20 minutes I can tell you something. So the plan that we had come up with was to go just south of Kuwait and split into 2 groups of 10. Me and John Marshall, my wing commander, was flying my wing that morning. We're going to lead the group over into western Kuwait, and Dean Pennington and Frank Mooneyhan were going to go and lead the group into eastern Kuwait. And we were going to attack SAM sites. We were going to peel off 2 guys at a time as we came to each target and hit those targets. Well, we were at 25,000 feet doing about Mach 0.85. We descended down to 20,000 feet, accelerated to Mach 0.92, and I called for the fence check where you go ahead and put your master arm on, radar warning receiver as loud as it'll go. You make sure your bombs are armed and ready to go. And it was quiet. It was like a normal training mission. Nobody's calling anything. We're not getting any radar indications yet. No AAA. There's nothing. It's like a normal training mission. I had gone, John Marshall and myself were going to hit an SA-2 site. It's a surface-to-air missile, SA-2, and it's got about a 35, 40-mile range and goes up to 80,000 feet. It's a big, long, fast missile, and it was just a few miles over the border of Kuwait. We were going to hit it. Then we were going to come off still in front of everybody and see if we could draw attention to ourselves and let other people come in and go to their individual targets. So about 45, when we got about 12 miles south of the target, I checked 45 left. And as we approach the target, you look out on the ground, and the SA-2 is in a Star of David configuration on the ground. And at each point, there is a missile with 2 missiles on it. In the middle is a radar that's looking for targets to shoot at. So I see the Star of David on the ground. I roll over, 45 degrees of bank coming down, pull the power back to idle, open the speed brake. The airplane accelerates to about 500 knots. I got 4,000 pounds of bombs on board I'm going to drop. And once again, the 2,000-pound Mark 84 bombs with FMU 113 nose fuse. And it's a Doppler fuse that's 16 feet above the ground. It'll go off. And I got a tail fuse that I can select that the bomb will penetrate something and then go off, like to break up a runway or a bridge. But this air burst, the first 1,000 feet, the ground will be clear, and it's damage out to 3,000 feet. So these soft targets, these SAMs sitting on launchers and stuff, it's going to kill them. We're using 300-foot spacing. So anyway, at about 10,000 feet, I'm tracking the pipper right up to the target. I hit the pickle button. I get 2,000 pounds off the left wing, 2,000 pounds off the right wing. I start pulling back on the stick and pull about 8 Gs pulling out. I check left 7 o'clock. John Marshall's about 6,000 feet at left 7. His bombs are coming off. And all of a sudden, my radar warning receiver starts screaming at me. Beep, 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 beep. I look up, and I've got an SA-2 at left 8 o'clock. I see the launch. I look out the window, and here comes a telephone pole riding a smoke trail through the air coming at me. You know, Ryan, in training, we don't actually shoot missiles at each other. This is the first missile I've ever seen in flight coming at me. So you do what the engineers have said is going to work, and you hope it's going to work. You turn and put the missile at a 90-degree angle. So you're giving it the biggest crossing angle possible. Now, as the missile closes in, it's doing better than twice the speed of sound. It's doing about 2.5 times Mach, so it's covering ground very fast. And at the last second, you roll and break into the missile and try to give it a 3-dimensional tight turn that it can't handle, and it misses you. Now, the missile's not designed to hit you. It's designed to pass within about 50 to 100 feet of you, and then it's got these laser fuses, and it blows up and sends the titanium ball that's wrapped around the explosive out at about 6,000 feet per second in a big giant ball, and it tries to catch you in it and blow you up. So anyway, I see the thing coming, and at the last second I break, the missile misses and goes back here and blows up. We start fighting back for altitude. All of a sudden we get an SA-6 launch right 3 o'clock. We execute the maneuver again, and it works. Our octaves were a little bit high on the radio. The seat cushion might have been drawn up in my rear end a little bit, but we were doing what we had been trained to do, and it was working. Listening to the radio and looking at the sky that morning was very traumatic. My guys now have split in their individual 2 ships. I got guys attacking SAMs all over Kuwait, and the nation of Kuwait is exploded. Anti-aircraft fire, just like you see World War II stuff, is all in the sky. SAM smoke trails are everywhere. There's probably about 45 or 50 SAMs in the air going after guys, and guys are screaming on the radio, break left, look out, you got one at right 1 o'clock. I heard one of my young lieutenants going, I'm hit. As I scanned the horizon, I didn't see how I wasn't losing guys like crazy. We continued deeper into Kuwait. We finally hit the time when it's time for us to leave and get everybody out because Air Force bombers were coming in behind us. I gave the command over the radio to fight their way back out. And John Marshall and I accelerated to the Mont and got above 30,000 feet, outran one last SAM, and finally we crossed back into Kuwait. I had a radio frequency that everybody was supposed to come up after the mission, and we were going to check in and stuff. I had a hard time bringing myself to check in because I knew I had guys down. And when I gave the command to check in, one at a time, there were 19 guys on the radio. It remains one of the most amazing moments in my aviation career. I joined the flight together, and we headed back to Al-Kars. It was pretty quiet on the radio, our first combat mission, and thinking what we had just been through. And we landed. As I pulled into my parking spot, before I shut the airplane down, I'm pulling in and just stopped. All of a sudden, the airplane rocked up on one side, and I looked out the left wing, and the bomb loaders were slapping another 2,000-pound bomb on board. And we shut down, climbed out, went in to debrief the mission. The next group was coming out, and they went north and did their mission, and we did that for 39 straight days. Had some amazing missions. That first day of combat, though, was very intense. It turns out we had about 45 to 60 missiles launched at us and tons of anti-aircraft fire. The lieutenant who thought he had been hit had a compressor stall that blew his feet off the rudder pedals. He thought something had hit him from underneath, but the engine caught itself, and he was able to get back out and get back.
Jet, can you give us an idea of how hectic the radios were during that fight?
It is with 20 individual guys on the radio. And, one of the advantages of training like we do, and it's really, I'm sure it's the same for like the Cincinnati Bengals or, some great sports team that stays together. You learn each other. You learn each other's voices. One of the reasons that I'm called Jet is because that's the call sign we use in the air. When I want to talk directly to my wingman, John Marshall's call sign was Bones. I use Bones. I don't use Scab 47 or Coors 28. Now, the mission tasking order gave us a call sign every day. But, you're flying, you see a SAM coming up at your buddy. You don't go, Coors 27, break left. And I also don't want to say John, break left. There might be 20 guys named John on this frequency. There's probably only one guy called Knothead. There's probably only one guy called Bullet. There's probably only one guy called Jet. So you can talk, and we learn each other's voices. And so even though it was jumbled, the individual two ships that were engaged, the guys were able to continue to talk and to operate. But it was very hectic and confusing and something like I'd never been through before. We don't do that in training, and you don't have that level of intensity in training. And it was everything I just told you was about maybe about 9 minutes.
Oh my God!
Unbelievable, intense, incredible stuff. And we didn't scratch an airplane that day. Now the Air Force bombers came in right behind us, and the Iraqis had depleted all their stuff and didn't have time to reload, and the Air Force bombers got in unscathed. And so even though we blew up about 7 of the 10 sites they wanted us to kill, we got credit for depletion of enemy air defenses more than destruction of enemy air defense.
And can we just talk through briefly one of those SAM evasions? So you have to identify this thing that's moving twice the speed of sound. Then you have to kind of maneuver yourself so you're perpendicular. It's out your wing, basically.
You're trying to give it a 90-degree crossing angle. Now, think about it, Ryan. If you take a car that's doing 100 miles an hour and it's coming to a very tight turn, its turn radius is very difficult for it to make that turn. Well, my F-16, I'm doing maybe 400, 500 knots. If I can pull 9 Gs, the circle I can turn is this big. Well, that Sam may be able to pull 45 Gs, but he's going 2,500 miles an hour. And so his turn radius is bigger than mine. Now, the other thing about a SAM is generally they have an X configuration of the wings in the front. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So you got a wing here and a wing here. If all 4 of those wings are working and the SAM is capable of pulling 40 Gs, it'll pull 40 Gs using all 4 of those. But if I give it a 3-dimensional maneuver, somewhere in there, it's down to just using these 2 wings. That cuts its G capability during that portion to about 2/3 of that. And so its turn circle gets bigger. So we're just trying to make it as challenging as possible. Now, the other components we add in, turn, put it, give it a big crossing angle. At the last second, try to give it a 3-dimensional maneuver with your best turn. And you're putting out chaff and flares, and your electronic countermeasures pod is squirting out electrons. All you're trying to do is increase that miss distance so the missile doesn't blow up. The key to it, though, the critical component is you've got to get it visually. And oftentimes, depending on where the SAM comes from, I'm not going to be the first guy to see something shooting at me. My wingman is. If I get shot down, it's very likely his fault. And so we are very dependent on each other to make that call. Now, my little wingman, Frank Mooneyhan, great young pilot, but he was kind of hyper. And so in the first few missions we flew, if there was SAMs or AAA, I would hear on the radio, flare, 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 flare. He was saying, flare, flare, flare. Well, the last missions we flew, he would still go, flare, flare, flare. So anytime I heard that, I knew I was under attack by something, and I had to look for the SAM to try to visually acquire it to be able to beat it. I'll tell you real quick, one mission up near Basra that I had some SAMs come up and just barely missed the airplane. I barely beat them. They had tasked us, it was towards the end of the war, they had tasked us to go and attack a train that had come out of Baghdad and come to the port in Basra. And they were worried that the Iraqis leaving Kuwait were going to rearm there, and they wanted us to hit that supply train. Well, Saddam by then had set the nation of Kuwait on fire. There were oil fires burning. The ceilings were down around 7,000 feet, and below the cloud deck, visibility was about 3 miles, and it looked like hell. I mean, there was fires burning and black oily smoke and stuff. It just was so. The clouds went from 7,000 to 24,000. So I went above 24,000, me and 3 other guys, and we went up just north of Basra, kind of between Iran and Iraq, and descended over a huge marsh up there. I figured that was probably a safe place to go down. I held 3 and 4 up high, and me and Frank Mooneyhan are right in the close. Frank's always rolling his eyes, like, oh, God, what are we doing now? We punched down through the clouds, and as we were going down, I started to get some radar warning receiver that there was radar out there looking at us. But we finally break out at about 7,000 feet. I couldn't see too good, the weather, but I could see about 2 or 3 miles. So we descend down to about 4,000 feet. I turned to a 135-degree turn back to go back towards the port of Basra. As we crossed the Al-Sharat waterway that separates Iran and Iraq, we crossed over that waterway there, and I found this railroad track. So I made a left turn there, and that threw Frank Mooneyhan at my right 4 o'clock at about 8,000 feet. Well, I'm descending down the railroad track, doing about 480 knots, and buildings are starting to come. I'm starting to see warehouses, and I'm looking, and I don't see a train. I don't see anything. And I see where the railroad track's in, and there's no train there. So I start to pull up, and I roll over, and I'm about 3,000 feet. And I look straight down, and I'm looking directly at an SA-9. It's a tracked vehicle that's got 3 surface-to-air missiles on it, and they're infrared heat-seeking missiles. Well, as I'm looking at it, the first missile launches, and then the second missile launches. Well, the first missile looked like it was shot way back here. I'm looking straight down at the thing, and the second missile is moving across the ground. Well, Frank's going, flare, 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 flare. The second missile is moving across the ground, and then it slows down and looks like it stops and hovers. Well, what it had actually done is it had turned and started coming up. And so the lateral movement, and at the last second, I said, oh, crap. I pulled the throttle to idle, started pumping out flares, and I hit the left aileron and just did a real quick. And that thing went right off the belly of the airplane, missed it about 5 to 6 feet. And for whatever reason, it didn't fuse. It didn't blow up. Now, I mean, yeah, I'd have gone right down in the middle of all the bad guys if I'd had to jump out there. So I called AWACS real quick and said, hey, we're getting SAMs. And now in the Al Sharat waterway, Saddam had anchored a bunch of his big ships there and perpendicular to prevent an amphibious assault coming up from that direction. And I asked them, could we attack the ships? And he said, flight lead control. So I armed up and told him any hand to arm and hit one of the ships. I rolled over on my back about 20 degrees of dive, tracked this big giant ship, and hit the pickle button right as the thing got to it. And these 2,000-pound bombs came off and went right between the two smokestacks and cracked the boat right in two. By that time, Frank Calder was blind. I pumped out one flare. He joined up, poof, right back in the clouds, back up on top, adrenaline going like crazy. Turn around and go back to the next mission.
God. Just a quick thanks to our sponsor, Delete Me, and we'll get right back to this combat story. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the term doxing, but as I've mentioned on the show, having served at the CIA and in the private sector tracking down bad actors, I'm very familiar with the way online and personally identifiable information can be used against someone. In fact, I've been doxed several times over the past 3 years where my personal information has been shared online. This is possible because data brokers collect huge amounts of PII, create profiles and listings that can include social security numbers, birthdays, past addresses, and more. These data brokers crawl the web to get this information. Delete Me will find this information online and remove it so it can't be surfaced. I signed up and received a bespoke report for myself and my family that showed me all the places my information had surfaced, what information they had, like name, address, phone number, social, and more, and that it had been removed. We all have the right to stay private and protect our personal data. Head to joindeleteme.com and use the code COMBAT for 20% off your plan and avoid being doxxed and harassed like what's happened to me. And now, back to this combat story. Jet, I know you got, I believe from what I read, 5 air medals and a DFC. Was the DFC on that first mission the one you just talked about or a different one?
No, it was the mission I just talked about.
Yeah. Holy cow.
Yeah.
So when you guys land after either of those missions, what's the discussion on the ground when you hop out of the cockpit? I mean, you know these guys and their families.
Well, here's the thing, Ryan, and you know, I mean, for any of these guys, you know, you go on an intense combat mission like that, the adrenaline is like a drug. I mean, it's hard to wind down. I mean, you are pumped. I flew a mission on February the 5th. John Marshall came to me and said, CENTAF has called and said, we got a bunch of AGM-65 Maverick missile, tank-killing missiles in the bomb dump, and they want us to start flying with them. I said, okay. You know, the Maverick is just unbelievably lethal weapon, but you got to get in close and tight, and you got to be right on top of the enemy to use the thing. I mean, you got to be visual with them; they're visual with you. You got to get down. You know, so it's not a distance weapon. So I picked Dean Pennington and Bullet Bellinger and Wayne Nutt. I mean, 3 of the best pilots in the unit. There was a bunch of really talented guys, but I got the 3 of them and said, okay, we'll fly with Mavericks tomorrow. We talked about how we were going to do it. We loaded them up and we went on this Maverick mission. And the weather had been crap to start the war. There was low clouds and visibility and everything. Well, this day was crystal clear. It was beautiful. It was AGM-65 day, hour, go kill stuff weather. So we're heading on. AWACS, as soon as I called them, they handed me off to a killer scout, guy that was up there already orbiting. And he said, how far out are you and what do you got on board? I said, we got 8 AGM-65 Maverick missiles, tank killers. And he said, get here as fast as you can. I got 8 T-72 tanks on the move. And we said, holy crap. So we pushed it up just under the Mach and flew up there. He said, I got to leave. He told me where they were. And so I descended down about 17,000 feet, and they were right on the border of Kuwait and and Iraq, and they were headed south along a paved road. And about the time I flew over them, they were turning to the east, and they're going out and they're single file. It's a line of 8 of them. Well, everybody's Maverick comes up, and we're expecting, it's an hour missile, so we're expecting a hot background. We're expecting a hot target on a cold background. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning. So we descend down about 3,000 feet. We're going to go shoot or cover. I'm going to roll in, shoot first missile. Bullet Belling's just going to fly my wing until I get my 2 missiles off, and then we're going to swap. He gets his 2. So Dean Pennington's going to follow me at about 2 or 3 miles, and so we're going to attack him. The game plan always in a lead like that is to kill the front tank and the back tank. So the middle guys are all trapped in the middle and can't figure out what to do. So as we're coming down final, I'm getting closer and closer, and I see these tanks with my eyeballs, and I'm back inside looking at the picture, and I don't see anything that looks hot. And finally, I see these little black dots. They're colder than the background, so they haven't been running long. And so I call out, cold on hot. We switch real quick, and I lock. The gate goes in real good on it. I hit the pickle button, and it doesn't seem like anything's happening. It's about a 0.9 of a second delay for the missile to come off on the Maverick. And then the missile comes off. I pull up and out of the way. Well, the Maverick missile's got a real short impulse. It only lasts about 5 seconds, and it only accelerates to about 900 knots. So it's not it's not like a supersonic missile. And so I see this little smoke trail, and I'm arcing around. I'm watching the tank. I think the thing must have gone stupid somewhere. And suddenly it hit that tank, and it looked like it blew up from inside. The Maverick missile is a shaped charge, and it punches a hole, and the charge goes inside, and then it detonates from inside, and it just obliterated this thing. And about that time, Dean Pennington's missile hit the trail tank, and they scattered like a covey of quail. And we started doing random attacks going after them. Now, we stayed down low. There were guys on the ground. You could see them shooting their AK-47s at us. And we were really exposing ourselves down there to killing these tanks. Wayne Nutt, my number 4 guy, had 1 missile. The video wouldn't come up. So we killed 7 tanks that morning. So we haul butt back to Al-Kars for our next mission. We land. As I'm coming down the ladder, there's a public affairs guy, and he's got 2 reporters with him. And they come and say, how you doing, Captain? Tell us about your mission. Well, I'm still, I'm up here somewhere, so I start talking to them. They kind of backing up, like these combat guys are going to attack us. And anyway, I told them a little bit about the mission, and then we go about our business. About 2 years later, Desert Storm's open. We're back in the fighter squadron. And I get a phone call from this guy named Lance Stout. And he said, hey, Major Jernigan, I read a mission that you flew in Operation Desert Storm with Maverick missiles. He said, can you tell me about that mission? I'd like to paint a picture out of that mission. And so for about the next 6 or 8 months, he'd call me up and say, what color was the desert? I'd tell him. He said, where was the sun? What color was the smoke when the tank blew up? So, and then he quit calling, and I never heard anything else. Well, about a year after that, a security guy comes and gets me and says, hey, there's a guy at the front door of the fighter squadron wants to talk to you. And I went out there. There's a guy standing in a big old painting. He was a Lockheed Martin artist, and he had painted this scene from that day that was breathtaking. Unbelievable. And it was exactly what it looked like. And it's hanging in here. It's right over there. I'll send a picture of it.
Please do. So I got to ask, I've seen the interview with Colin Powell where you are interviewed getting out of an aircraft. Right. At what flight is that from? Is it one that we've already talked about?
The very first mission.
Okay. So just for people listening, we're going to put a clip of this at the very end. So if you want to see it, you can. But there's 4 things that I hear you say on this. And it's great because Colin Powell's talking about it, and then they show you saying it. The first is, thank God for a successful mission and getting back safe. And to caveat, Colin Powell, as he's describing this, is like, we've never really had press hanging out here. And all of a sudden, this fighter pilot comes back from this opening mission. And I'm like, what is he going to say?
Right.
And then the second thing, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jet. Do you say, Lord bless me with a good woman? Is that what you said?
Yeah. what you going to say?
I love it. God bless fighter pilot. And then thank you, God, for, that I'm an American and an American fighter pilot, right? And Colin Powell, the last thing he says on this interview is like, I couldn't have asked for anything better. Like the American people got to see the confidence and capabilities that we had, like from the mouth of the person who was doing it.
Yeah, well, and here's the really cool part is after the war, he wrote a book, and he included that particular, the trepidation that he felt going through the first night, and then the next morning he turns on CNN and he sees that event, and so but he didn't know my name. We'd never met. He didn't know who the guy was. And some guys told me, he said, hey, I think you're in Colin Powell's book. I think he's talking about you. I said, oh, okay, that's cool. Well, one of the guys in the Guard here invited me to come to a fundraiser for a local hospital, and the guest speaker was Colin Powell. So I said, yeah, that'd be great. So we're in civilian clothes. We go to hear him, and he stands up and tells that story about seeing the pilot stuff. And my buddy goes, he's talking about you. I said, I think he is. So at the end, when he finished talking, we got in the line. He was taking pictures with people and signing autographs. And he kept looking at me. And when we got up close to him, he pointed at me. He said, you're the guy. I said, yes, sir. How you doing? Jet Jernigan. And so we went in the back and talked about 25 minutes about what the first night was like for each of us. And he corresponded with me for a number of years on anything to do with aviation. My mom sent him a book she had written. And so anyway, it was pretty cool.
Do you remember, what did he say? What was his thoughts that he shared with you about what that night was like?
Well, he talked about the potential losses and really some of the similar feelings. His position and the scale of his input was much more than mine. But it was the same thing about how is this what they have planned, what they're allowing the Air Force to do, the restrictions that they have not given, the tasking that they've given. How many people we're going to lose? What's the loss? We're blessed, Ryan. Desert Storm. You haven't talked much about Desert Storm. Desert Storm was conducted the proper way by guys through Vietnam. Even the president said, I want him out of Kuwait. And the military said, okay, we're going to get him out of Kuwait. We're going after lines of communication. We're going after transportation. We're going to sever supply lines. We're going to break down individual units so they don't have the ability to communicate with each other. It can't be resupplied. We came up with our basic stuff. By the time it got to me and the tasking came to me, the tasking was, here's a target, go kill it. You've got 15 minutes to do it. We could decide how many airplanes, what munitions, the direction of attack. We had no restrictions at all except minimize civilian casualties. And if you feel like you're going to cause ancillary damage, bring bombs home. And that was it. And so it was passed down to the lowest level, and we were able to do what we had trained to do. And it was really a blessing to be a part of it. And, it was conducted the way we ought to do it.
So I've taken you super long here, Jet. So I'm going to wrap it up here in just a moment. But I want to ask, if I got the dates right, you retire in August of 2001.
Correct.
Is that right? And then obviously September 11th happens the next month.
My mother was convinced that they waited for me to retire. Oh, he's retired. Now we can go do something. But it was in the Guard, in a reserve unit. If the United States Air Force, U.S. Navy, U.S. Marine Corps has somebody eligible for another stripe, has somebody eligible to make lieutenant colonel, they can move them to another unit. You're in units for 2 and 3 years. There's openings. You can move people around. When you were assigned to one unit, there's only so many lieutenant colonel slots, full colonel slots, and so it really tightens up. I had been an 06 colonel for 6 years, and me sitting in that slot prevents a guy from making colonel, prevents a couple of guys from making lieutenant colonel, and 3 or 4 guys from making major. So it really ripples, and it was time for me to leave. So I wasn't happy about it, but as all of us walking out the door when all of a sudden you have been the guy protecting the nation and now you are going to have other people protecting you. That part's traumatic enough. My retirement became official and I was transferred to the retired reserve on August the 31st, 2001, and they attacked us on 9/11. I spent the second half of the month talking to Lindsey Graham and Joe Wilson and anybody I could get to listen to try to get reinstated, but it was too late. And you know, they had other stuff going on. I was flying for American Airlines at the time, and I was wrapped up in all the airline stuff of marshals and secure cockpits and, you know, doing that stuff. But it was very difficult to sit on the sidelines. And all, I mean, today it still is, you know. I'm out there, I'm eating chicken. I'm out there running every day. I'm lifting in the gym just in case they call me back. You never can tell.
Oh, I love that. I love that. How do you look at the pilots of the post 9/11 era? Certainly, like you mentioned, the advanced avionics that you got to be a part of. As you look at the aircraft now and the kind of the guys and gals who are flying, what do you think of this new generation? They
are incredibly capable. Once again, it is they're still incredible machines, and you potentially end up in dogfights, and you may have to go drop a bomb on your own. But for the most part, the data processing and managing massive amounts of information. The single seat, single engine fighter, you're doing it all. You're having to fly, you're having to process all this information that's coming in. And it is a different generation. The Vietnam era guys, the flight suit unzipped about halfway down, they hitting the bar right after work, chasing girls and, out there in fist fights and stuff, being the toughest guy on the block and all that kind of stuff is really that there's not a whole lot of place for that these days. I like that attitude, but you've got to take it and tailor it to data processing, timing, and it is still a people business. I don't care whether you're with IBM, Google, the CIA, or a fighter squadron. 50% of our job is how we feel about each other and how we relate to each other. The other 50% is our skill at doing our job. But for us to function properly, every single person has to step up and do what they do. One guy missing a block, the whole play is going to collapse. One guy missing an enemy fighter getting through can destroy the whole thing. One guy dropping a bomb on a civilian installation can hurt the whole operation of the entire thing. So everybody has to operate extremely high level, and God bless them. Now, the other part about it, and I don't mean to get political, but it is military. Our active duty military is too small. It is not big enough to meet the tasking. It breaks my heart to hear some guy on his 5th tour of Afghanistan got killed. There's no reason that guy should be on his 5th tour of Afghanistan. And the other part about it is the reserves are having to fill in with day-to-day missions. And so for the guy that works at the Piggly Wiggly or is an airline pilot or works down at the Michelin plant, it's incredibly demanding for that guy to go on a 1-year deployment somewhere to fill in on a day-to-day mission that active duty should be doing. So either we're overtasked or the active force is too small. Anyway, that's a commercial portion of this message.
Well, the last two questions, Jet, that I try to ask everybody. One is, was there anything that you carried with you when you flew, especially in combat, that you just wanted on you, that maybe it's something that somebody gave you, good luck charm, had sentimental value, something like that?
Absolutely. I carried a camouflage New Testament Bible. Carried it in my flight suit along with my magazines for my 9mm. So,
where did you carry it in the flight suit?
I'm sorry, in the G suit. It was in my G suit pocket. Yeah, the G suit zips up and it's got big pockets on the front by your shins. Now the thighs swell up with air and the waist swells up with air, and then we had a over suit that swells up with air that helps you push against to try to keep blood up here as you're pulling G's. right? Because at 9Gs, me and my gear is about 200 pounds. At 9Gs, I weigh 1,800 pounds. It's very difficult to keep blood up here because this little pump is trying its best to get it going, but the weight of the blood gets to be so much. The only way you can do it is extreme straining to try to stay awake. But I carried that little Bible on every mission.
That's cool. And then last question that I ask everybody, looking back on that time, I can't even imagine you had a kid on the way when you deployed. It's hard enough going as a bachelor and then as a married man, but to have a kid on the way is tough. But after what you saw, the near misses, the people you lost, would you go back and do it again?
I would absolutely do it again. I feel, honestly, Ryan, there's not a man on earth that I envy. There is no civilian counterpart to what you and I have done. There's no civilian. And the people we've met, the people that I've seen you interview I did it for 28 years. When it was coming to an end, one of my buddies said, I got some bad news for you, Jet. Not everybody's in the military. And he meant when you get on the outside, it's a different world. And I went to work for American Airlines, and it was surprisingly different. It's a different world, and I miss it terribly. I miss part of being a part of that. And so absolutely would do it again.
Yeah. Well, Jet, I can't thank you enough, man. This was a blast. After looking at your bio, I had so many questions, and I'm sure we could spend much more time together, but can't say thank you enough for this. Appreciate the time.
Well, Ryan, you've done a great job. I appreciate it. You make it easy to go through, and I've enjoyed reliving some of this stuff with you. And if you ever want round two, I've got a lot of flying.
Oh, you got it. I'll sign you up for that. Let's do that one in person someday.
All right, buddy. God bless you. Thanks, and keep up the good work.
And suddenly, one of the first scenes coming off one of our airfields is of this F-16 landing. Rolls to a stop. Canopy pops open, pilot comes out. I met him later. His name is Jet Jernigan of all. I mean, right out of Hollywood Central Casting. Jet Jernigan is the young man's name. And I'm watching this in real time in my office, and suddenly the youngster turns around to talk to the reporters. And I said, uh-oh, no telling what Jet Jernigan is liable to say to a pushy reporter. And what Jet Jernigan says is, I'll tell you what it was all about. He says, first, I want to thank God that I completed my mission successfully and I got back to my base safely.
Been very fortunate, fellow.
Sounds pretty good. American people hearing this. Confident, young American pilot. Starts to walk away and he looks over his shoulder a second time. He says,
Lord bless me with a good woman.
He starts to walk away again. He looks over his shoulder a third time. He says, I want to thank God that I'm an American. And then he looks over his shoulder a fourth time. He says, I want to thank God that I'm an American fighter pilot. I about swooned.
God bless America.
American people saw this spirit of confidence, spirit of professionalism. It was a feel-good that we had not seen since the end of World War II.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story. A couple comments from listeners. The first is from Christopher Cole on the Ryan Rogers interview, and this is Ryan Rogers, the Marine who was in the Battle of Marja. And Christopher Cole says, wow, that was effing deep. What a good dude and leader. Thanks for having him on, Ryan. And of course, I reciprocated and was back on Ryan's show for him to interview me. But he is a really special guy, and the way he digs into that battle in particular meant a ton to me. Another comment, Christopher Cole as well, and he says, wow, these stories just get better and better, Ryan. Thank you so much for doing these. That bank robbery part was out of left field. I'm actually just north of Tacoma, about 45 miles. Leaves me to believe that their Ranger base was Joint Lewis McChord. I'm not that far away. Anyways, thanks again. Cheers from Seattle. And that was on the Operation Red Wings interview that we did with Tony Brooks. And then lastly, this is a comment from Larry Irishman, and it's on our interview with Chris White. And he says, excellent. Had to listen to it again today. So this interview with Chris White has been a crowd favorite for sure. Obviously, a former longtime dev crew operator, just what you would imagine for a frogman with the facial hair to prove it. But great guy, really digs into some of the tougher moments in the contracting space after he was a SEAL, and people really, really enjoyed his story. So thank you for leaving that comment, Larry and Christopher. And with that, stay safe, y'all.